Yes, this is Castle Grayskull, even though it's green. It's green Grayskull.
Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again. It's George the Antique Nomad, and today I've just gotten out of the bank with a big wad of cash because we are in Clarksville, Tennessee, and we're going to spend the day looking at stores around here. I've been really busy with my shows and had a really good year and filled all my retail spaces full of stuff. And so I need fresh stock because show season in Florida starts right after New Year's. So I am motivated. A motivated buyer is something that I'm sure the antique stores will like to see. There's a bunch listed here. I've been to a few in the past. There's a bunch I haven't seen before. So let's go and we'll see what's out there. So the first place we're going to is called Rocking Horse Antiques and Consignments. Places that sell consignments, sometimes it's new stuff, sometimes it's used goods, and sometimes it's real antiques. So I usually give them a chance and see what they're like, and if it's got antique stuff, I'll go back again, and if it's all a bunch of new stuff, well, that's for someone else. So Clarksville should be an interesting place to find stuff. When I've shopped through here in the past on my way to Florida, I have found things, and it makes sense because it's a military town. There's a big army base here, and when you get a lot of people who move in and out a lot, it tends to bring interesting things and leave interesting things behind. So it's a bright and sunny day for December. Actually, it's turning into a nice day, and so we're gonna spend it by going inside. And here we are at Rocking Horse. Let's see what this place is like. I haven't been to this one before. See an old Hall teapot in there for 20 bucks. That's not a bad price. Those used to sell for double that though, and I don't really pick them up unless they're really cheap nowadays. Still like them, good quality. A lot of this is more used interiors and perfectly nice, but not really what I look for. And consignments oftentimes means clothes, so here's consignment clothing. Okay, horse clock is 100 bucks, and this one's got an old shade in not great shape. I really can't get those kind of prices for them where I sell, so I don't know how they're going to do that here. Yeah, again, like a lot of consignment stores, it's really more new stuff, home interior stuff. It's all like in the last 20 years, and it's just not what I do. So let's get in the car and go see another place that's more antiques. I also see a sign that says Queen City Flea Market open Wednesday through Monday, and of course I love a good flea market, and there it says Auction World Sale every Saturday and Sunday. So let's see if the Queen City Flea Market is anything. It says going out of business sale, and I always like a good going out of business sale. I always feel sorry for the going out of business part, but it means things might be cheap. Well, we didn't show you much of that because it was more gone out of business than going out of business. There really wasn't anything much left in there. So I will walk on over to the other place, and maybe that's where everybody moved. Hopefully we'll see some old stuff there. Look, this is Clarksville Indoor Flea Market, and this one looks like it might be the replacement for the one we just left, so we'll find out. Here we go. Woo. Well, this one definitely has stuff. This guy looks more like Johnny Cash than Geronimo. This is going to be something somebody hand-painted, I think, out of a mold. This is popular to do in the 70s and 80s, but they're not really very collectible at this point, so if it's not a manufactured bust, I usually don't get them. This is an old church pew under all this stuff, and you know, I've always thought of buying these, but they're so big. People usually cut them in half and make smaller benches out of them, and I just don't have the space or a shop to do that in. It is kind of a neat idea, though. It's a way to preserve these things. A lot of churches around here are closing down. There's a lot of consolidation.
So there's some rattan here, and I do look for rattan for Florida. These are 1980s pieces, I think, and I don't mind doing that generation if it's something that's really substantial and well made. These are kind of, like pure one from the time. They're not super interesting to me, so I think I'm going to pass on those, but it's good to at least see some old stuff in the flea market. And brass is coming back into style, and it's got that sort of 80s deco revival kind of look to it, but this one's real wonky, and a lot of times with brass they would just drill right into the brass and put the screw in, so if it starts getting loose it doesn't have anything to bite onto, so they're not really easy to fix. So I think I'm going to leave those, even though the look is very right now. Okay, well, I just spotted this clock in the corner here, and it's really cool looking. It's very 70s flower power, and it's by Spartus. They did lots of novelty clocks in that time. But when I pick it up, I notice that it has a quartz movement on the back. Now, quartz came out in the late 70s, but this clock is earlier than quartz movement. So this has been repowered, and I really want ones that are original. I'm real picky about stuff like that. So are my customers. So unfortunately, I'll have to leave it, even though it's really cool.
You may say, gee, he's awfully picky, and you're probably right. I've been doing this a while. I've got a lot of merchandise, and so I don't buy everything that I see that I can make money on. And I'm looking for diversity because I do a lot of shows and I want to show different things. So I don't want to have multiples of the same thing. I'm not just selling online, and so I'm thinking what goes into a retail booth, what goes to a show, and what could go online. And sometimes I just think, I've got enough of that particular thing. I'm going to look for something else. So we're going to go look for something else. So I see one more flea market that just opened in this little complex. So we're already here and the car's parked. Why not? You never know. I've found some pretty great things in flea markets in the South. I went into one that was all junk, baby junk, bad clothes, bad dishes, and found a $500 Blanco glass vase there. So you just never know. That's why we always try. So there are some older pieces here right away. This is a pattern from the 1940s, and it's in the red color, and this is a nice quality piece. They're $30 for the pair. There was a time that glass collectors really went crazy for these in colors, and at one time that's $28 for the pair. At one time that would have been a bargain price. Nowadays it's a pretty close to the correct price, so it's not something I'm going to spring for. Here's a piece that we should show you. This is supposed to be Roseville. It even says on the bottom Roseville. It's not Roseville. Roseville never did a white clay bottom. It always was tan. These are reproductions made in China, and if you look closely, the coloration is not really good. Roseville had a very soft airbrushing to it, and this is very harsh. They've just colored a line and a line and a line, and so it's also lightweight compared to the original, so don't be fooled by these. This is Hall, again, the same that made that teapot we saw earlier. And this one is Fiesta in the gray. And this one, darn it, has a chip. That's too bad, because this is a good piece. Good, how are you doing?
Just fine, darling.
Show the moose, hold it up.
These were made in Austria and Germany about 1910, and this one has the Austria mark on the bottom. And a lot of people like creamers that are cows and elks and all sorts of other figures. Although it's kind of funny, it comes out of his mouth. Now that's a real piece of Roseville. You can see the difference. You can see the airbrushing and how the colors are softer and they blend into each other. And so that is a real piece from the 1930s or 40s. Looks like the apple blossom pattern. Okay, so first I have to show, I did go ahead and buy the Roseville piece, and partly because I thought for the price that it was a pretty good deal. It was in good shape. I tapped it very gently to make sure it rang and didn't have a dull thud where there would be a hairline crack. And I also went around with my palms to make sure there weren't any chips, because your fingers get calluses and you miss them sometimes, but your palms, you can usually feel anything. And if you notice on the bottom, it says USA, and the color of the clay is tan. That's what makes it different from the fake one that we showed you that was in the same store. So that's what you look for with Roseville.
And she clued us in that they actually have an auction next door every Saturday night. Ooh, lots of crunchy noises. And so we're going to go and take a little preview because they're setting up for the auction and see what's going to be coming up next week and if we need to come back. So we are in the auction house, and they do have a few interesting things up front for the auction, but they also have a big collection of stuff that unfortunately for me is not for sale on the back wall, but there's some really cool stuff. So I wanted to just point out a few highlights as we walk by. A couple of pedal cars. You've got the Fire Chief and the Mustang, which are 1960s era. I remember stealing one of these from the baby boomer kid down the block who was way too old to have it anymore when I was a little kid, and his mom came and took it away from me, which made me very sad. I also noticed here Miss Pac-Man. That's a pretty cool thing. 1981, right there, original. And if you have room for these, they're pretty collectible because, you know, it's Pac-Man. I mean, everybody knows Pac-Man. It needs a new mirror, but this is really pretty neat with the horoscope. You would actually step on, get your weight, and then press the lever for whichever sign you were, and that would become a piece of paper that would probably say the same thing as every other sign, but it seemed very important. This is a Recording King, which isn't a high-end brand, but it's got the old soundboard. And that's a really cool looking piece. Not exactly a sunset finish, but a dark brown finish. And with the big soundboard, usually guitars like this sell minimum, even an inexpensive one, for a few $100s, and sometimes a lot more. So I'll do a little looking into that one. Ay caramba! The auction house next door still apparently opens on the weekends, but the store that had been there for many years, it was a guy and his dad in his 80s or 90s, so they probably retired. And it's unfortunate because it was full of old guy stuff, and I always like to come here for that. But things change, and so we're going to move on too. So this obviously is a very old shopping center from the 50s, so as we drive out, at least we'll get a chance to see a big piece of old neon.
As we drive out the wrong way, so gotta love the Nomad for forging his own route through the wilderness of the Mexican strip mall.
Okay, yes, I should have noticed that where it used to say Antiques, it now says Iglesia Conversión, Mateo 28. Obviously, I don't speak Spanish well, but there's still the old 50s neon sign from back when this was a big old shopping mart. So that's something to look at least. We've gotten to Warehouse 41 / You Never Know, which are a couple of stores in a big old freight warehouse that used to be the Riley Hardware Company. I'd say, judging by the style of this building dating back to about 1910, it's been an antique / used / new furniture complex for a long time, but I'm hoping they have some small things too. And then the You Never Know shop, well, I really don't know because that's different than when it was when I was here last time. So let's go take a look. It says cool junk, antiques, weird stuff, and retro. And it says, come on in, we're awesome. So, well, we'll be the judge of that, won't we? Let's go inside. Hello. Ooh, they're having a lot of sales, so that's always good for me. We'll have to take a look. Okay, so the first thing I see is Metlock's Daisy pattern. And this is from the 60s, and it was all kind of sculpted ware, and then they would hand paint over it and fire it. Matlock's was a great company. They made really good dinnerware, and they would have survived probably until now, except that they were family owned, and the last generation, they got a divorce and blew the whole thing up. So that was the end of that. But it lasted until the 80s, and Daisy's pretty good pattern. And I see it a lot in Tennessee because it's a really popular pattern here, but it's actually got a real modern flair. So I'm going to give that some thought. Okay, here's one of our 50% off booths. So I always like to look at them because I figure that half of a decent deal is a great deal, and that's a good way for me to be able to make money. I have not heard of Milky's Party Time sparkling beverages before, but this does look like an old carton. In fact, we know it is because it's got a US patent number of 3.2 million, which is going to be from the late 60s, right around 1970. I like these sorts of things. People actually get a kick out of these if they're bottle collectors or decorating. Sometimes people will put napkins and utensils in them and put them out on a table. So I might get one of these if I can figure out how much they are. It's half off of something, but it's not clear. Oh, here we go. Okay, they wrote in pencil, so they were $6, so now they're $3. Yeah, why not? I think that that's something that somebody will like. Stay put. Okay, there we go. Nothing like wrecking someone else's display. I wanted to show you this booth really quickly. We're in a place that is not strictly antiques, so it's acceptable for it to be here, but everything in this booth is brand new, not one antique. All of it looks old or is trying to look old. The table, okay, I stand corrected. The table is actually antique. There is one thing, and that actually makes it a little bit deceiving because it makes you think maybe everything else is too. This stuff is not old. These are very lightweight and flimsy. If you look at the jadeite here, you're going to see that they look like the old patterns. Ooh, that's very rickety. I'll have to be careful. But if you look at them, they've peeled off the Made in China stickers. They tell you right on the box that you could peel them off and no one will know, which is really crooked. And this is shiny like new glass, and it is obviously not worn in any way. These were things people bought to use. So if you see something that seems so perfectly new, unless you know that it came out of an original box, there's a good chance it's a fake. So it does pay to inform yourself. All the signage here, including the old Gulf Pride, is about half the weight of what it would be if it was real. So again, it pays to educate yourself. Okay, this is super cute. It's from the 70s. It's towards the end of enamelware. They started doing colors like this because people weren't buying the plain enamel anymore.
It's
and
what?
It's enamelware. And
super cute.
is it super cute?
You said it was.
Well, I think it's cute. And it's probably from about 1970. This one is made in Finland, so that makes it interesting. There are people who collect Finnish modernism specifically. Here's a little silver leaf old-fashioned set with the metal caddy, and people love these beverage sets that have the caddies. They like taking them out on decks, and it sort of matches the informal way people live now. But it's $29, and for that one, that's about the right price. And it's 15% off, but that's not quite enough to really attract me. This piece is kind of cute, out of the late 40s, early 50s, and it has this Mexicali design on it. Now there is a piece here, another piece of Metlocks that is a harder to find pattern. This is called Navajo. This is one of their more modernist lines, and this is going to be a 1960s piece. And it is popular with the modernist collectors. At $27 minus 15%, it's a good buy for a collector. It's not really a good buy for me to make money. It's not marked Metlocks. Not every piece got stamped, but if you know their line, that's definitely one of theirs. We don't see that often here. Usually that's something you see out in the West Coast. The Renard sculpture is a 1970s piece, 1979 actually. It's made of chalkware, and they've marked her down to 75. She, as an art piece, really should sell for about that price. And I've had similar pieces before, and there is definitely a market for them. She's on top of a bird's eye maple table. You don't see a whole ton of bird's eye, and this is interesting to me because it looks like the veneer is heavy enough that they've actually been able to refinish it. A lot of bird's eye is cut very thin. This is a cute piece probably from the 20s. I don't see, oh, I do see a price. It's actually priced $90, which is really reasonable for what that is. Again, it's not the kind of thing I'm looking for right now, but for somebody, that's a good deal. I'm going to show this because we're in the Christmas season, and this is Bach, and you'll see the mark on the bottom. This is a German-made piece. These are from the late 70s, early 80s, and they did an entire line of this. This is actually pretty collectible now, and a lot of people think it's newer than it is, but it actually is vintage. So if you're a reseller and you see that out there, it's worth looking at. Okay, well, I finally found something that I'm really excited about. I have not seen these before. Camels were a really popular motif in the 1920s, and cast iron bookends were also. This one actually looks like it may even be have a bronze patina. And so you've got the crescent and star on his saddle. This is an interesting thing I haven't seen before. They're priced at 30. They were originally 65. I think they were originally 85. I do think that they're worth about 65. So I'm going to pick them up and take them with me. And I bet that we find a buyer for them pretty soon because they are something a little different. They're also very heavy, so you can really use them. And that's important because they are bookends. A lot of people really buy antique things and vintage things because they want them to function, not just to look at them. So this is a pretty cool thing. It's a panel from the old Galaxian video game. So it's one of those pew pew kind of collectibles. And we see lots of people interested in anything to do with early video games. So this is a pretty neat piece. It's priced like it's a pretty neat piece, so it's going to have to stay here. But I wanted to show it off because it is something that people are collecting now. It looks to me like a baby resuscitation doll. Have to say that's something I've never seen for sale before. I'm not sure whether I should want it or not, but it is one of those oddball things that makes people stop and look. So I think I might take a look at that because it's also 40% off. So they're speaking my language there if they're still honoring the sale, which is 2 days old, but I suspect they might. So I think we will have them come and open this up for us. So we're in another booth of the month, and I wanted to talk about this booth because a lot of stores that are divided up as vendor malls or whatever you would call this really mix old, new, and whatever. So this is the booth of the month because it's cute and it looks like Christmas and it feels seasonal and it looks sort of like what you would have in your house. But as far as antique and vintage reselling, there's almost nothing vintage in this entire booth, once again, other than a couple of pieces of furniture that have been painted. And so it's really up to individual taste as to whether this attracts you or not. But for real vintage reselling, this sort of thing is not the booth of the month as far as I'm concerned. This is an old Simpson Busher scale. It says 1950s. It might even be a little older than that. Stibson Computing Scale Company approved type P9, and I would say from that it's probably more like 40s vintage. Doesn't really matter a whole lot in terms of age or value, but it's a neat looking piece, and they are kind of fun to have in a house. For resellers, you can use them for weighing large packages, and then you have something cool to look at instead of a new digital scale. We've got an old Evinrude boat motor. And there are people who collect boat motors, and some of them restore them. Some of them actually use them on old boats, but some of them just have them on display. If they live in a lakefront house, they might have one just sitting there as a novelty. It's like a piece of sculpture. It's really fun to see people using industrial items in a way that's almost sculptural now. It's something that really hadn't happened until maybe the past 10 or 15 years. Definitely wanted to show that they have a big variety of cast iron here, and there are a lot of older pieces in here as well as some newer ones. They've really been cleaned up very well and seasoned, and they're priced full retail because of it. Well, this space has some cool stuff. I love old traffic lights. This one's been rewired to plug into your house or your storefront if you want to get people's attention. I had one of these in an antique mall, and they lit it up, and they were so sad when it sold because they said that's what got everybody's attention driving by. So then they had to go buy another one. This one's priced at $2.25. Again, full retail. Castle Grayskull, of course.
By the power of Grayskull.
Yes, this is Castle Grayskull, even though it's green. It's green Grayskull, and it is $50 for the two pieces. He-Man stuff, very collectible now. It's funny, it just takes a generation, and boy, that's been 35 years. Can you believe it? And then we have a pachinko machine. Pachinko is very famous as a gambling device in Japan. So again, we're in a military town. A lot of these end up being brought over by GIs. And in fact, every one I've ever had was from someone who was either in the Navy and stationed in Japan or in the Army and stationed in Japan. They're fun to collect, and you can rig them up, and if you change the wiring to adapt to American, it will work. And they're fun to play. And there's some other stuff that's kind of fun in here. Again, you're going to see a lot of stuff that's from everyone's childhood, or at least everyone in a certain era. You've got Share Bear, and you've got Good Luck. This is Share Bear specifically. Yes. Yes, well, anyhow, believe it or not, yes, even Care Bears are old enough to be collectible now. Not desirable, but collectible. Little bit of Fiesta wear here. This bowl, the mint green from the 30s, is $28. These are all original colors, except I just lied. This is not an original color. This is a 1980s yellow, and it's got the ink stamp on the back. So that's a definite difference. We don't see these ink stamps until later Fiesta production. Not this style of stamp anyway. Because this is the earlier style. So that's one way to tell your eras apart if you've got two colors that seem similar, because the original colors do sell for more, generally speaking. Although there are a few oddball colors that they did in the 80s and 90s that are discontinued, like lilac, that are very collectible too. It says antiques and more. There was more than antiques, but there were some vintage things, and I did get a couple of cool things. And then we went down to You Never Know, and you never know what they might be reproducing in China. Unfortunately, we found a lovely striped blanket that looked like it was from the 50s and picked it up, and it's completely fleece acrylic. It is a brand new Chinese copy. The Chinese just love to take anything that people are collecting and make a new fake of it. So another thing that we have to watch out for. But it was pretty easy to tell as soon as you picked it up that it was fleece, so we knew it wasn't vintage. The rest of the store was cute, lots of painted furniture, antique things repurposed, but not really anything beyond decorative, and that's not so much my thing. So we're going to go on to another antique store.
So by the time we got to this last shop, it was already turning to dusk, which was pretty appropriate. This is Oddly Amazing Antiques and Oddities. These fellas sell down at the Nashville Flea Market. I didn't realize I'd seen them there till I went into this shop, didn't know they had a shop. And it's pretty cool and fun, and not exactly the kind of junk store you'd expect to see in a place like Clarksville. This has a lot of interesting oddities. That guy looks sinister. California hanging ashtray from the 70s. And look at the big Rottweiler black velvet. My good friend Raina had a lovely Rottweiler named Tasha. Looked fearsome, but she was pretty cool. Old radios, old mannequins. This place does a lot of things that are hip and fun and a little offbeat. They had a lot of people in here today too. This tiled piece is Mexican, celebrating Day of the Dead. And then for you hipster entertainers, here is the full-on Hammond organ. You can do all those 60s and 70s hits on the Fun Machine. Another velvet painting. Back in here you'll see just an odd mix of things from studio pottery to Vaseline glass from the Depression era. Nice beer sign, Andiker, that was a Pabst offshoot back in the 60s. And there's Little John, one of the world's greatest philosophers. Big selection of cameras in this place. And there's a big hole next to them where there was a Canada dry rack, but that ended up in my car. Would have liked to have taken this gurney too. This is a real one from the 50s. People use them for parties, as banquet tables, rolling bars. There's a bunch of Day of the Dead stuff. I like Day of the Dead Hello Kitty especially. Good old beaten up trunk behind all that too. They've got a lot of Brewery Anna and various advertising here. That's a pretty good fighter jet on the stand there. That's going to be from about 1970 from California. And then you see the old Chemcraft Senior Laboratory from about 1950. Definitely a lot of stuff in here that came out of somebody's man cave. This piece is a remnant from an old Clarksville company that used to make these cast iron pieces as part of corn shellers, back when this was a more rural area. That is an actual laboratory table or morgue table. I would not suggest looking in the drain hole. And then there's a cute collection of salt and peppers to bring you back to a happy place. It's a fun juxtaposition of stuff here. Old railroad lamp, old bottles, old doll parts. But now we're going to see something even more frightening. They do have a bunch of toys and childhood items, and masks and things. I'm sure this would be a fun place around Halloween. A little bit of tins and Petroliana type things. Over here are a lot of little guy cases like I like to take to shows. I think they take these to the Nashville flea market as well. There's a razor collection, a bunch of bottle openers, key fobs, pin backs. I like the orange head. And I like the way they show off the Vaseline glass with the black light so you can really see what it does. They've got stuff all the way from Victorian era up to about 1940 in there. They get some good little furniture pieces too. This set of 4 chairs here would be nice in an apartment because they're 70s, they definitely have the modernist look, and they stack. Speaking of the 70s, that was part of a K-Tel record set. Had a bunch of these fraternal sashes. I bought a bunch of them. People like to wear them now just as fun fashion. And they had some pretty good political buttons, and I took some of those with me too. Part of the oddities in this shop are a big selection of old medical bottles and specimens. Oh, and speaking of a specimen, not popular with the ladies. Again, there's a lot of stuff that you see out of Dad's old man cave here, and seems tame to us in these more wide open days, I guess. And then taxidermy and fossils.
Really?
Either a mammoth, a small mammoth, or a giant sloth.
Wow. Small mammoth or giant sloth bone. That is cool.
I hope it is. I'm 40 grand in debt to a biology degree.
Straight razors, more apothecary jars. The old fire extinguishers are kind of interesting. Stereo equipment. They get some good vintage pieces of that. Little leather libraries I see there. And specimens, a whole bunch of oddball specimens in jars. So we've got a lot of creepy, fun, interesting gifts. Some more cool masks. Anyway, this was a really fun store. It was fun to spend the day in Clarksville, and we'll have a whole episode on the big store in Clarksville. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community, here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media daily posts and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.